Chickity chickity check. I'm a riggedy riggedy wreck.
Mic check 1, 2.
You always have such nice vibrato.
Me?
Yeah.
Thanks, man. I'm blushing over here. Oh, do you want to sync up? Because I kind of want to sync up.
Yeah, me too. Are you recording already?
Yeah, cutie.
All right, cool.
Hello, and welcome to the Interstate Gamers Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin, a.k.a. K-Slugs.
My name is Peter, a.k.a. Duo for Real, and I'm also your host.
And we are back with another video game review, my man. Our 24th one, in fact.
You know, 24 is a very good number. It's divisible by 12, and by 8, and by 6, and 4, and 3, and 2. Really loud numbers.
Yeah. And it's almost a quarter of a way to 100. So I guess we need to do something extra cool for game 25, huh?
Yeah, well, I think we might actually do just that. No spoilers, though.
No spoilers. But I wonder what our 100th episode will be, or 100th game review. Who knows?
I don't know. Maybe it'll be like Super Mario Brothers for the NES.
Or the best game of all time, Celeste.
A
re-review.
The retrospective review.
Yeah. But we're not here for the 25th game. We're here for the 24th game, or the 100th game. We're not here for the 100th game either. We're here for the 24th game. What is that game, Peter?
This game is a really solid entry, I think, in a beloved Nintendo series. This game is none other than Kirby's Adventure for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Damn. Kirby's Adventure. So I played this game a few years ago, and on the Wii U. I had a Wii U back then, and then I kind of gave it away because I didn't need it because it didn't really have a lot of games. But that's neither here nor there. And I beat it, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to revisit it again. So I was excited to revisit it and play it. That's all I got to say.
Yeah. I had never played this actual NES version, before, except when I was really little, like maybe 6, and I had some family friends who lived kind of far away, so I'd seen them maybe once a year or something, and they had an NES with this game, and so playing it kind of like brought me back to those days. But I did play the remake of this game, which I will speak about briefly. Are you ready for some context of the game's development and all that jazz?
You know I'm always ready for that context.
Heck yeah.
Hit me with it.
So this game came out in 1993 for the NES, one of the latest NES games, because by then the system was already 8 years old. For other context, Super Mario World, and by extension the SNES, had come out in 90 in Japan and 91 in the US. So, I mean, people were already playing Super Mario World. They were already calling it the best game ever made, just like I used to. And so here comes this like Kirby game, right? For the NES, and it's like, this really old hardware, and it's like, what the heck, man, why don't you just make a, Kirby game for the SNES, which they did later, called Kirby Superstar, and I love the F out of that game. But anyway, Kirby's Adventure was the second game in the Kirby series. It was preceded by Kirby's Dream Land for the Game Boy, which came out less than a year before this game. And this is actually the first Kirby game where you have copy abilities, the thing that, like, makes a Kirby game a Kirby game.
Yeah.
It started in the second game of the series. In the first game, you couldn't get abilities, you just swallow enemies. So it doesn't sound quite as much fun as this game. But yeah, so this game introduced copy abilities. It introduced Meta Knight also, although I don't think his name was never revealed in this game. That came later. So yeah, second Kirby game. This game was remade for the Game Boy Advance in 2002, and it was called Kirby's Nightmare in Dreamland.
A good game.
I agree, a very good game, and a game that I borrowed from a friend, actually the same friend who had the SNES back in the day. I borrowed this game from him, or the Game Boy remake, rather, and never returned it, so heck yeah.
Damn, dude. How you gotta do him like that?
I think I told him, like, hey, I never returned this, and he was like, it's okay, I'm a grown man in college, and I was like, what is that supposed to mean?
Oof.
That's enough context, probably. The point is, this is a very important game for the franchise.
Yeah.
And how is it to play it today? Kevin and I are here to tell you just that.
Yeah. I would definitely say if you'd like to get into it, do you want to go ahead and get into the gameplay, or?
I think it's about time to get into those meat and potatoes.
Yeah. So let's do that. So yeah, I think this game, as you kind of already alluded to, sets the standard for a lot of Kirby games that we know and love today. I actually didn't know that it was the second Kirby game. I always thought it was the first because it was on the NES, and like NES came before the Game Boy, right? So it's kind of like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's the first Kirby game, but I didn't know it was actually the second one. So good little tip there you gave me. But yeah, if we're gonna dive into the gameplay, I think we would need to talk about the mechanics first, Peter.
I agree.
Before I talk about that, I think you should hit us up with those mechanical facts that you got going on in there.
Ah, yes. Man, I'm giving so much context today. Hitting them, rapid fire. Yeah, so in this game, Kirby is a platforming game for anyone who's unaware. You play through a series of linear levels, but there's a larger hub world with several sections, and each section has between 4 and 6 levels, plus a boss, plus some mini games. So you start off in level 1 and you beat it, and then you exit a cute little door, and then you find yourself in this big area. Well, actually, it's not big at the beginning, but as you complete more levels, you unlock more doors to enter. And some of those doors are hidden as well, so there's some secrets for you to find. You navigate through the levels using your jump and your float ability, which is also a Kirby signature move, the ability to float in the air, and basically just fly as much as you want. Although it is slower than running, so you can't just fly through levels all the time or else you get bored and you'd be moving slow. Inhaling enemies, getting their power-ups. You can also spit out enemies. There's mini bosses in certain levels. There's big bosses at the end of each world. As I said, I think I said this, there's some mini games scattered throughout that you can play if you want. They're not too important, but you can get some extra lives or some points or what have you. So yeah, there's a decent variety of mechanics at work here. Do you want to take us a little deeper into the gameplay, Kev? Yeah,
so overall, though, it's kind of a simple game, right? You think Kirby, you think simple. And this game did, like I mentioned earlier, set the standard. I kind of want to talk about this game and its lag, because this game is quite laggy, and it's one of the things I noticed right off the bat.
Yeah.
Several times, if too many enemies were on the screen, it would lag extremely bad to the point where it's almost unplayable. Like, you just kind of want to be like, what? Like, it's 2019, why am I playing this, And so, and it's not just the enemies either. The lag was pretty consistent throughout the entirety of the game. Like, there would be, it's not entirely obvious all the time, but you could tell, it just would slow down at various parts. And that's because, this being a later NES game, they were quite ambitious with the graphics and things like that, which we'll get into later, but it looks good for NES game, but I think they sacrificed a lot of gameplay quality for that. So I'm not sure the trade-off was very worth it, but I guess the developers felt like it was. But I will dock some points on it for its lag, because it definitely ruins a lot of the gameplay.
Yeah, I agree. And to clarify for any newfangled listeners who don't know what lag is, we're not talking about the frame rate dropping. We're talking about the game literally slowing down to a chugging pace. And as you said, it happens most often when there's a bunch of enemies on the screen. But even there are some enemies who just when they attack, like the fire enemy or the spark enemy, they'll create so many objects with their attack that one action will slow down the game tremendously. And then if you take their ability, then every time you use it, you're going to cause lag. And not only is it frustrating because it slows the game down, but also because it eats your inputs, I feel. Did you ever feel that? You were having inputs get eaten?
My God, so many times. It's actually one of the things I wrote down.
Yeah, me too. And I feel really, a lot of the game's difficulty and frustration for me, not that there was, overly much of it, but the amount that was there, I think, came 90% from the lag and from my inputs getting eaten. Because, even if the game's not lagging a whole ton, it's still usually lagging at least a little bit, which is enough to eat inputs still. And so, I would press A, and then I wouldn't jump, and I'm pretty sure I pressed A. And I go to an area where there's no enemies, it's just me, and then I'd press A to, confirm that my button works, which it does.
Yeah.
So, that's how you know, right?
Yeah.
And, man, I feel bad because I think mechanically, this game is really, really solid. And if there were a version of this without lag, then I think it would be like really, really good gameplay wise. But I mean, the lag just always being there, I agree with you. It makes you question if the trade-off for these beautiful visuals was worth it when when the Super Nintendo was right there already.
Yeah, exactly. They could have just done that. I actually said, it's funny you say that. I actually said the same thing to Chris. I was like, the only difficult part about this game is how clunky it feels. It just feels so gross. Like, you're just like, why? And you're like, how did this make it through the testing phase, if they even had one? It was just kind of like...
I'm sure they did.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, wow. I mean, there are some parts where you're like, well, that was very visually stunning, but you're like, other parts, it's just like, ugh. But getting to the controls, if we can just get off the lag a little bit, because I guess we already hammered it in that it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I wrote that it didn't feel like the button presses responded very well, but I said perhaps due to the lag, which you had already mentioned. But the game also had tap jump, which is very weird for a Kirby game for me, because I think a lot of times you could just hold A.
Yeah.
In previous ones, and I was just like, I would accidentally press the up on the D-pad, and I would just like start floating in the air. I was like, no, I didn't want to do that. I'm just like, I'm pushing to the right, but it read it as an up input, and I was like, no, I didn't input that. And I don't know if that's because of the way the Switch is or whatever, but I kept jumping when I didn't want to, and it made the game feel even more clunky, so that kind of sucked.
Were you playing on the Pro Controller?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like it's not even a manufacturing flaw, it's like a design flaw where every Switch Pro Controller, like, it's really easy for it to read up when you're pressing right or left.
Really?
So, yeah, and like, I noticed it a little bit when I was playing Celeste, but a lot with this game. I'd have the same problem that you had. And so I just switched to the analog stick, which actually I'm finding works pretty well for this game. Like, because it's not like a super precise platforming game. I mean, Celeste is actually, and I was playing that with a stick and not having any problems.
Yeah.
So for anyone who wants to play this on the Switch, don't use the D-pad on the Pro Controller because you're probably going to run into problems like we did.
I still don't like the tap jump thing because, I don't know, maybe I'm just used to the other way, but it feels so much more natural just to hold a button and, like, you can, even if it wasn't as sensitive as it was, you can still accidentally hit up or something and then end up in, like, Kirby's, like, bubble mode where he's, like, floating around like a balloon, and then so you're kind of helpless in that state.
I think it makes a little bit of sense when you consider that, jumping and flying, you can call them two different things. And so maybe then it makes sense for them to have different inputs. But I don't know at what point they changed it in the series, but like every Kirby game I'd played, and I haven't played every single Kirby game, but I've played all of them since like all of the games between like 95 and like 2005 I've played, which is a fair number. But in all of them, you press A multiple times or you just hold it down to jump, or to fly rather, and pressing up doesn't make you fly. So I don't know at what point they changed it, but you and I are obviously used to the current way.
It feels so much more natural to do it that way for some reason, and I don't know why, but I think they figured it out too. So me knowing that option was available in the future, it might hinder it a little bit. I mean, there's not much to talk about in terms of the controls. That's just one thing that made me feel like even more clunkier.
Yeah.
If you don't know what tap jump is, it's kind of a setting famously used in Smash Bros. That allows you to jump when you push up on the controller. This game just jumps when you push up on the D-pad.
Dude, maybe this is why Smash had tap jump, because of this game.
Yeah, I had that exact thought. Sakurai?
Yeah, for those who don't know, the director of Smash Bros., Masahiro Sakurai, is also the director for most, if not all, Kirby games. Definitely back in the day he was. Like, he's the creator of Kirby. So
I don't think he has a hand in them anymore, but
perhaps not.
Mashed Potato Samurai.
Mashed Potato Samurai. Yeah, so actually there's a bunch of like interesting similarities, I think, between Kirby games and Smash games in some ways.
Yeah, but, for sure.
I think that's a good topic for some future tangent, maybe not right now.
Right.
I do want to talk about the copy abilities because they are new to this game and they're, the signature Kirby thing now.
Yeah.
I can't freaking imagine. I should go play the original Game Boy game just to like see. It's probably really boring, to be honest.
Yeah.
I read that when I was doing my research. I read that some players had complained that the first Kirby game, Kirby's Dream Land, was too easy and was too simple. And so part of the reason they made copy abilities is just to give the game just some more depth, like as a direct response to that criticism, which I find pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So there are 24 different copy abilities. And actually, there's 25 if you include Light, but Light is a very, very situational one that you just use in like 2 levels. Other than that, there's 24. And most of them are fairly simple, where you just press the B button to do one attack. Later on in the series, especially in Superstar, they would start like having all these different inputs that you could do in different contexts, like all these different moves. But back then, it was pretty simple, understandably. But I like them. I think the abilities are really fun. There's a variety of ranged attacks and then close-up attacks, so they're not all the same thing. I think they did a good job of varying it up, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. And like I said before, it's still a Kirby game, and like it feels like a Kirby game that you know and love. And hearing that it's the second one and it's the first one that had copy abilities, I think makes it even more impressive, because it was the game that set the standard for Kirby, like what a Kirby game is. And it's still a fun world to be immersed into. And it's, yeah, I mean, surprisingly on such an old console, I mean, I think it I don't want to say it performs well, but it's definitely, I don't even know what I want to say, but it, like I said, it's a Kirby game, and I think it's really cool, and it's still fun. It's just not, it's the lag. It gets me, and the controls, but I mean, other than that, and the copy abilities, like that's still a lot of fun to utilize, right? And so,
yeah.
And so I think having the copy ability and using that does make the game so much more fun and makes Kirby what it is. And that you can have this game on the NES where you have games like, name like a very, like the first Zelda. You know what that looks like, right? A lot of us know what that looks like. Like, to have that and then you look at the Kirby game on that same console, you're like, it's just night and day.
Yeah. It's like Super Mario 64 compared with Perfect Dark, pretty much.
Right, yeah. And that's getting a little bit into the aesthetics, but still, I mean, it kind of works for the mechanics as well, and the way that characters interact with the world in them. So you can understand why it's laggy, but at the same time, yeah, I don't know.
Speaking of aesthetics, are you ready to wrap up this section and move on?
I think I am. But before we do that, what did you give your gameplay section?
I want to explain my score after I give it. I gave it an 80.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've said on the show that we try to, with these older games, we try to balance like the viewpoint of what they did for the time compared with, how they play now.
Right.
And really, I mean, the lag, like, I hate to be a broken record, but
yeah, I know.
It just impacts the playability of the game so much that I wouldn't really recommend that people play this game necessarily, unless they're like interested in the history of the franchise or they just want to be like impressed in other ways from a Nintendo game, because I think this game does impress in other ways, and we'll get to that. But at the time, like, people really liked it, and I can see why. Like if people could put up with a lag back then, which I suppose they could because the game got good reviews, then it's really at its core a really solid gameplay experience. So I kind of tried to balance out those two viewpoints and got to an 80.
Yeah, I hear you. I definitely took that into consideration as well. Unfortunately, though, I'll just go ahead and give my score. I gave it a 70. I just, the lag, I guess, mixing both of those two viewpoints, does it hold up today, and does it, what did it do for its time? I think it was really impressive for its time, but I think the value in it drastically decreased as time progressed. Especially since they had other capabilities when making this game. It kind of just puts a damper on the game in terms of its gameplay, quite a bit, I would say.
Yeah.
And it kind of sucks, but if you were just to take if the NES was the only console ever and like everything stopped after the NES, you could say that, this is one of the top-notch Kirby games. I would or not Kirby games, top-notch games of all time, right?
Yeah.
But as games came out and as time progressed, I feel like some of the other NES games became more prevalent than this one.
I agree. I think a game like Super Mario Brothers, well, actually all of the Super Mario Brothers games, I think they hold up more because they're still so playable today, really.
Yeah.
And they have their own charm that doesn't get, sucked down by lag, because those games don't really have lag that I remember.
Right.
So, yeah. Anyway, let's try not to say the word lag ever again.
Okay. Never again. Gal.
Are you ready to move on to the
Aesthetics. Yes, I am.
Cool. Why don't you go ahead and start us off, my boy?
I would be glad to. So we're talking about the visuals, and I gotta say, this game looks stunning for an NES game.
Hell yeah.
This game boasts bright and vivid colors with pretty detailed textures in an era that really didn't have a lot of those. Like, there's just a lot of like really ugly NES games. I'm sorry, there just are. But you can tell they put a lot of their time and effort into this game, and they really wanted to immerse you in this new world that they had created, which I guess is not super brand new because of the Game Boy game, but you get the picture.
Yeah.
And also, another thing to note is that the animations of this game are also really well done for an NES game.
I love the animations.
The animations are probably the best in all of the consoles, like all the games ever. So that's pretty impressive, and a lot of people like the NES. So actually, I didn't know animations like this were possible on this console, but yeah, it looks and feels and even smells like a Super Nintendo game, but it's an NES game.
I love the smell of NES in the morning.
Yeah, me too. I love the smell of Pumbaa in the morning.
The reason the game looks as good as it does is because it came out 8 years into the NES's lifespan.
Right.
When it was really already made obsolete by the SNES. But, the developers, they just knew how to push the friggin' console to its limits. Obviously, it cracked a little bit because of the word which shall not be named. So they didn't completely get away scot-free. But when you see these visuals, I think it almost makes it worth it. Like, you've got these beautiful animated backgrounds. Like, you have clouds that are bubbly, and you have, did you notice that? Just how many of the backgrounds are just animated? And it's like,
yeah,
they didn't need to do that, but they just went ahead and freaking did it anyway. And the little, cut scenes when Kirby enters a new world, and, he does a little skit, basically, before you actually start playing the game. And it's like, it's totally unnecessary. But, they went ahead and they just made this, fun little 10-second cutscene just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
Just to really sell you on the cuteness and, the fun and the goofball aspect of the Kirby world.
Right.
They just
I love Kirby.
Yeah. Oh, we know you love Kirby.
Kirby.
Yeah, I do want to call out one particular animation which I loved, which is so there's a little bonus game that you play at the end of each level where Kirby falls into a bouncy platform, and if you press A at the right time, you'll get sent up super high past all these clouds with measurements on them, basically. And if you land on the very top one, you get a 1-up. And if you get the timing almost perfect but not quite, Kirby will grab onto that top cloud and pull himself up. But he has this really cute little animation with his feet wiggling back and forth super fast, and he just climbs up. And it's just so cute. It's like, oh, I love it. Just so polished. Oh. So charming.
Oh, I love you, Curbs.
I love you, Curbs.
That's my Smash main right there.
Heck yeah. Little pink puffer. But yeah, I mean, cute animation, just super detailed worlds and enemies and everything. Shit, man. It's really good.
Part of me wonders if, the reason why this game looks so, I want to say different and much better than all the other NES games is that I'm wondering if Nintendo at that point in time was using a more sophisticated and developed game engine for the NES. If they had a standard development kit that they sent out to all the developers, and if they were using something that was, a lot more developed than when it first started, and they kind of understood programming a lot better at that time. So I'm wondering if they're it's pretty much an SNES game smushed into the NES console.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as a 12-bit game in a way.
Oh, yeah.
I'm no expert on the NES. I have played very few NES games. But when you think of the most famous NES games, a lot of them just come from the early days of the console. I mean, you got Super Mario Bros. You got Excite Bike, you got Legend of Zelda, you got Metroid. And all of those are pretty ugly-ass games, really. I mean, they have their cute they look like the stereotypical NES game because they are.
Right.
But then you have this game and it's like, what the frick? This is the same console? And the answer is, heck yeah.
Yeah.
The Mad Lads did it. They made a game that looks like this.
They done did it.
So yeah, I don't know what other games look this good. When I was reading the Wikipedia article, it was like a game that came out a couple years earlier, Tiny Toon Adventures, was regarded to have superior graphics but not as good animation or something. And I was like, well, I've never played Tiny Toon Adventures, but it made me wonder if there's any other NES games that have such detailed visuals as this.
Something very similar to this also happened for a Nintendo console, but later in its time. The Nintendo 64, Banjo-Tooie, I would argue, is probably one of the best-looking Nintendo 64 games of all time. I mean, I know there's a lot of them. I think you might have mentioned Perfect Dark a time or two, but Banjo-Tooie looks really good.
Yeah,
and
really
it's like
does.
really ambitious for what the console can do. Although they did have an expansion pack, but yeah, once again, really impressive. I know we're kind of beating a dead horse with kind of these themes of this game, but like they're so prevalent and it's just hard not to talk about them.
Yeah. My last comment on visuals is that in the third world of the game called Butter Building, there are several sections where the game employs this pseudo 3D effect to simulate Kirby walking around a tower. So the tower itself will graphically spin, basically. Like they just animate a sprite, essentially, so that it looks like it's moving. It's really just repeating the same few frames over and over again, but that's the visual, right? And so enemies will pop out around the corner, or they'll pop out as if they were around the corner.
Yeah.
It's not the most successful illusion, but still it's really ambitious. Like they were trying to make something vaguely approximating 2.5D.
Yeah.
And it's just and what's weird is that the remake for the Game Boy Advance actually ditched those areas completely.
Really?
There's no it's weird. I went back and played the GBA game for like 10 minutes just to compare briefly. And one of the levels that has this pseudo 3D effect in the original game, in the remake, they replace it with you standing on the tower, but like nothing's happening, but it's kind of foggy. And the fog dissipates over time, and then a door appears in the fog.
Weird.
Without you doing anything and without anything moving. It's just really bizarre. And I remember as a kid playing that and thinking, why is this here? Like, why is it making me wait for fog to clear? And there's like one enemy that's not really threatening me. And then I go back and I play this. I'm like, oh, it makes sense. Like there was something originally here that was really cool, but for some reason they didn't remake it in the Game Boy Advance when they could have easily made it look way better. Anyway.
Yeah, the last thing I have is the word that shall not be mentioned kind of took away from the graphics a little bit at certain times, but I felt like I already docked it a lot of points for gameplay. So I let it slide for the most part. But overall, really impressive. I'm down.
What's your rate of those hot visuals?
I gave it a hot, fresh 90.
Dang, I gave mine a 95.
Dang, son. So not too far off because one more down from you would have been the same score.
Yeah.
So moving on to audio. Pete Boy, why don't you take us away?
All right, I'm going to read you verbatim the very first thing that I wrote down in this column.
Oh boy,
Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready for this hot take.
Dank-ass music.
That's awesome. Dank-ass music.
I've mentioned before how the Kirby series has had some of my favorite music, and let me tell you what, man, this soundtrack is just banger after banger after mother frickin' banger. It is so good. I mean, this is probably like some sort of bias or something because I just like the Kirby series in general, but I feel like the series has always had some of the strongest music in Nintendo's repertoire. I should have looked up who the composers were for this game, but I did not, and I apologize to the music gods for that.
Pete Boy.
Really doing a disservice. Anyway, really good music in my opinion. Every single song is super catchy, but I want to shout out my homies, Butter Building, Grape Garden, Rainbow Resort, super classic tunes. I just love them. This game is a masterclass on chiptune music. I'm going to say that.
Damn,
if you want to make
chiptune,
if you want to make good chiptune music, you better listen to the soundtrack and get some inspiration.
Damn, I feel a hundo coming on. I don't know about anybody else, but I feel a hundo coming on.
See about that.
Yeah, no, this soundtrack's pretty darn cute. I'm not gonna lie. It set the standard for Kirby soundtracks for years to come. It's bright, it's bubbly, pretty much just the way that it looks. For me, you know how I love those sounds, and who can talk about audio and a Kirby game and not talk about the sounds, right?
Right.
So I love the sounds of these games, and I like the high-pitched noises that they use a lot of times, or like for Kirby's actions. It makes it feel pretty magical, like, you know, he's like this magical being, or there's some kind of fairiness going on there.
Yeah.
It just kind of fits with the theme very well, like bright and bubbly and just like, pew! So I've always loved that about Kirby. And I think what I love about Kirby, and this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but it kind of goes with his look and feel. Kirby's like this cute little pink ball, and you're like, oh, he's so cute, but he can like absorb people's powers. And like in Smash Bros, he does the thing where he like, when he grabs you, and I love this about 64, he grabs you, takes you up to the sky, and then brings you back down in like a blink of an eye and like slams you against the ground. I was like, no other character can do this. Like, this is so cool. And I love how like one moment Kirby can be this cute little cuddly thing, and the next moment he can be super fierce. I love that.
Well, you know, there's the whole, I don't know if this is a theory, really, that might be giving it too much credit, but there's like this kind of idea that floats around, like, you know, Kirby really is a mass murderer because he travels through all these worlds and he like kills these living things for no reason. Like, you could argue it's self-defense because most of them attack him, but Waddle Dees are just walking around, you know, they don't actually have attacks, and you just go and take out your big sword and slice them up, or you take your laser and shoot them down and whatever. So you know, there might be some sinister evil lurking behind that cute facade. I think I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that some of the sound effects, and I mean, these sound effects might have originated in their Game Boy game, the original one. I haven't played it, so I can't say, but sound effects like Kirby's Inhale, you know,
Yeah.
and then even the sound of the Warp Star, like the little tinkle sounding things, those sound effects have persisted throughout the decades.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they've made them more high fidelity when they need to, but like the general idea has stuck around. It's kind of a similar way to how Mario's fireballs still make the same sound all these years later.
Yeah.
I mean, that just goes to show, like, it's hard to make distinctive sound effects on the NES, I think. Music's a different story because, you know, music can be all these millions and jillions and billions of different combinations, but sound effects, it's a lot more limited when you only got 8 bits, and Kirby made it work, man. They made distinct sound effects.
Yeah.
8 years after the console was released, so there you go.
Yeah, I feel like the soundtrack did pretty good. It was kind of hard for me to rate this one because we've already rated a Kirby game, and I feel like I rated the soundtrack pretty high on that one. And I feel like, you know, Amazing Mirror, sorry, I blinked out there. Amazing Mirror, I really like the soundtrack and sounds for that game so much more, and I realize they're in different eras, and this one set the standard and all that stuff, but it was really, I found it really challenging to kind of rate it super high, because I just don't know that it was good for its time, and I think is amazing for its time, but I don't know. It's just kind of hard for me to rate, because I felt like the other Kirby games did it a little bit better.
I don't know, man. I mean, in the specific example of Amazing Mirror, I actually found that game's soundtrack to be fairly weak compared to others that I've played. I don't remember how I rated it, to be honest. I probably gave it like a pretty good score, which is deserved. But I mean, I don't know. It also might be a nostalgia factor for me because I played the remake of this game a lot, and so I mean, these are the same songs but just chiptune-y.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that like, I think really good music is timeless. Like, and it's a cheesy thing to say, but I feel like people could just listen to the music from this game, and chiptunes aside, like, there's some really interesting things that go on with the melodies and the harmonies and the chord progressions and all this stuff that like really makes Kirby music, I think, super special, even compared to other great soundtracks. Like these composers for Nintendo and for HAL Laboratories, like they know what they're doing. So
right.
I don't know, man. I just love it, and I think I see your point of view, but I just want to say mine as well.
No, yeah, that's completely fair. I kind of just looked at, you know, the list of games. It was hard for me to rate this game in terms of audio above Amazing Mirror for me personally. And then I kind of looked at the other games. It was like, well, I kind of, you know, I like the soundtrack to this one. We've had a lot of good soundtracks from the games that we've rated. So it's actually really hard to rate audio. I think more than any other category, in my opinion. But man, yeah, it was up against some tough competition, but I think it stacked up pretty well. It's not my highest rated game, but it's got a medium rating. So if you're done with your side, I'm ready to give my score.
Sure, why don't you go ahead and give your score, buddy?
Don't be too disappointed, but I gave it an 86.
Oh, Kevin, I'm so disappointed.
I'm sorry, I let down all my fans, but I had to keep it real. Keep it real for real. It's all right. I only gave it a 10. Times 10, 100. I'm not surprised at all.
No, I mean, when I start off a column with all caps, Dancast music, period.
Dancast music, period.
You know that's going to be some shit. So I stand by this 100. I think it might actually be one of the easier hundreds I've ever given out. So
okay, well,
I think the audio is spot on.
Sweet. Well, can't top that. I guess you rated. Did you rate Celeste 100 on audio? I can't remember.
I think so. Yeah, I think I gave it 100 in gameplay and audio, I believe.
Dang. 2 back-to-backs.
Yeah. I might be wrong, though. I might have... I don't know. I gave that game all, like, 95s and 100s, so it's kind of hard to remember which one was which.
Fact checkers, if you've still been hanging with us after all this time, I know we haven't called on you, but we're going to need you to fact check that one. Moving on to content.
Tent.
I got some hot takes for this one. I wouldn't say they're hot takes, but we'll just see what I got to say.
All right.
So I'll start this one off. A lot of NES games didn't seem to feature a lot of extra content, but I felt like this one did a really good job of including at least some extra content. I don't know of a lot of extra content in NES games. Of course, I haven't played a whole lot of NES games, so really my context is not there. But there's extra games with extra rooms and extra doors, all that stuff. But I want to say that while there were extra modes and like all this different mini games that you could play, like a claw machine and some like DDD arena game, I don't know. They were pretty weird but interesting at the same time and kind of fun if you knew what you were doing. My big critique of them is that they would tell you in the screen before in text what you were supposed to do, but you've never been in this situation before, so you're like, what are you talking about? And then they throw you into the situation, you're like, what? And then like all of a sudden like the game starts playing and then you die and you're like, before you even know what happens, and you're like, okay. And then they shut you out of the mini game and you're like, well, I can't go back in because like there's no learning opportunity from what you've done other than later when you go back and play that mini game again in a different world. So I think while there is extra content, it's kind of moot because that factor kind of ruins it. It's like they could just kind of throw you in there, and I'm just like, well, now I don't really like if I die, like that's it, like or I lose, that's it. You know, I thought that was a pretty big bummer. And another thing is that there weren't really any good rewards other than like getting extra lives.
I think I can kind of see where you're coming from, but I can't say that my experience was really like that. I mean, I felt that the games were fairly intuitive.
Right, but you've played this game before, right?
Well, actually, the mini games were different in the remake.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's only one of them is the same. The quick draw one, actually, the quick draw game has been in like 5 different Kirby games probably, or at least it's been in the ones that I've played the most. So that one, I definitely knew what it was beforehand. But like the claw machine and the chicken game, and then there's another one maybe. I don't remember. But no, they weren't there.
Yeah, there were several situations where I felt like I was just kind of thrown in despite the text coming before, you know, what you were supposed to do, and then I would die, and then I would be like, okay, well now I don't really want to play mini games anymore because they're just going to throw me in. So I was kind of discouraged from going back and playing through those. I'm kind of curious if my first, I'll never know, but like if my first playthrough I had the same experience. But yeah, I was just kind of bummed out by that, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the mini games, I mean, they're just, besides giving you the opportunity to win 1 or 2 extra lives, they're not the biggest deal in the world. So I wouldn't say it's like, I wouldn't say that you missing out
Missed
on
out,
them in that
yeah.
regard is like a huge deal. I mean, granted, in an ideal world, you would have enjoyed them to their max capacity, right? but at the end of the day, they're still just little mini games. It's not like you missed out on actual levels.
And they seemed fun and kind of cute, like the claw machine game. I really like that. I got me a thick Kirby.
Thick boy.
Thick boy. I loved getting the big one. That was fun.
Yeah.
But most often the reward you would get was just an extra life. And I know in later games there were other things for you to collect, but not in this game. So it's just kind of like, oh, I got another life, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the mini games really aren't like the highlight of the extra content in the game. I do want to say before we talk about extra content that the quote-unquote actual content of the game is 41 levels divided across the 7 worlds. That's a pretty good number, I would say.
Yeah.
And many levels have a hidden switch in them that if you... And I alluded to this in the gameplay, but if you find this hidden switch, it unlocks a new door in the overworld, and usually the door is a minigame or like a warp room that will take you to the other worlds you've already been to and all that stuff. So basically, like, it does encourage you to go out of your way a little bit and explore the levels and use your abilities creatively. Some of the switches are really easy to find, but some of them are actually quite difficult to get to or to find in the first place. So, and I did know where most of them were before because, of course, I played the remake. So I did have that prior experience. Mm-hmm. But I think that even for a new player, I feel like normally they would be like feasible enough to find where you're not looking for the one bush in a field of uniform bushes in Zelda that you have to burn down to find a... Like, you know, it's not really that ridiculous, I think. So
yeah,
there's usually some clue or something.
Yeah, it did a good job of presenting the extra content to you.
Yeah.
Making it available to you. But you still had to work for it at the same time.
Yeah. And the game does keep track of the percentage completion, which is probably quite rare for an NES game.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool.
I mean, we've established this is not your typical NES game, so we probably don't have to keep repeating that. But it does tell you how much percentage you've completed, which has been a recurring trend in Kirby games since. And when you get 100% in the main game, you unlock Extra Mode, which is actually just the same game, but you only have 3 little life bars instead of 6. And if you complete that, then you get a sound test where you can listen to all of the music and all the sound effects in the game,
that's
which
pretty cool.
is really neat. And actually, that has also become a staple of Kirby games, and also games that were developed by HAL and or Sakurai, like Smash Brothers, for example.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that, like, especially for the time period, this game really does, you know, reward you for exploring a lot and for getting your 100%. I mean, you know how I feel about that. I think this game does a good job of rewarding it, and
right.
And you know, more so than other games of the era did. Like even Super Mario World, like when you complete the game, you get the weird palette swap thing, and that's pretty cool. But you don't get like a sound test, and you don't get X, Y, and Z that this game gives you. So I was actually pretty impressed by the extra content and the presentation of it in this game.
You know what? I agree. And I've raised my score a little bit, I think, because of what you said.
I'm a salesman.
There's nothing wrong with listening to others' ideas and, you know, kind of taking them in and accepting them. That's what the world should be. You know what? I'm not going to get into it. But, yeah, no, I agree with you for the most part. So I want to talk about, like, the length of the game. That's kind of something we tend to talk about.
Yeah.
The conciseness is pretty nice, but I think overall it doesn't really have any replay value, and overall it's pretty short. You might disagree on the replay value part, but for me, I don't really have any interest in playing this ever again because I have other Kirby games that I would play. And maybe that's part of it being on the NES or whatever, but for the word that shall not be mentioned really harmed it in this aspect as well, but also I think this game would be a really good speedrunning game if it weren't for that. And so if it was, you know, just completely...
Smooth.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Smooth.
Then I think it would be an amazing speedrun game, but alas, it is not, and so therefore it is not. Now you can, I think I read this, you can get the NES Mini and like overclock it somehow, and then like, or whatever emulator you're using, and you can overclock it, and then apparently it's a much smoother experience. But natively, it's just not that great.
Yeah. I actually pretty much agree with you on the replayability aspect. They do have the extra mode, which, as I said, halves the amount of life, rather, that you have available to you, which of course makes the game harder. But I mean, do you really want to go and like play through all that for the extra challenge?
Yeah.
As a modern gamer, and I think the answer is no.
Yeah.
But I still think that the extra content the game presents is pretty impressive, especially for the time period. And so I think I gave it a more positive score in that regard, because I found that like I found that the way that it impressed me sort of outweighed the way in which it did not impress me in terms of content.
Gotcha.
I do also want to shout out the boss endurance mode. I think it's just called Versus Boss, but you can go and fight every single boss in order, which has also become a staple of Kirby games. There's a trend here, if you haven't noticed, of this game really laying the groundwork for for future Kirby games in many regards. There's also one more thing I want to shout out. This is actually my last point in content. But the very last level of the game is a homage to the Game Boy game. It plays the music from the Green Greens level, which is famous now. It's the do 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 do, which is probably one of the most famous Kirby themes aside from the infamous Dreamland Smash Brothers stage theme. But yeah, so here's a funny story. When I was playing the Game Boy Advance remake of this, again, this is way before I ever played the original, or at least that I could remember. I got to this last level of the game that was the homage, but I thought that it was homage to the NES game because it's the remake, and I thought, oh, this level is like all monochrome and it's playing retro music. It must be from the NES game that is based off of. But no, like, this game that came out only 1 year after the original game was already referencing the original game as if it were some like obsolete retro callback thing. The aesthetics of it were so distinct even from the NES version that they could still successfully make it look even more retro than the NES inherently was.
Retroception.
You know, like, it's just very weird. Like, you'd expect that from a game that came out 20 years later, not 1 year later.
Yeah.
So it's just pretty wild, but
that's really cool.
Yeah, so they were already, you know, shouting out their homie, the OG Kirby's Dreamland 1 year later. So that's, I don't know if that's like them being narcissistic or something, or just them having a fun time. Probably both, but
nah, they just love their game.
They just love their game. Yeah, you know, when you make Squirrel Hurler 2, you're obviously going to have to make a callback to
some Squirrel Hurler 1 shoutouts.
Yeah, fan service.
One thing I want to say, if you were expecting us to talk about story for Kirby, well, we wouldn't have very much to talk about. The game kind of just drops you in, and then there pretty much is no story until like the very end where they decided they wanted a story.
Yeah.
And so they're like, oh, okay, DDD's not such a bad guy after all. And I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't really know who, like, if you didn't know who DDD was, you're like, okay, like, I didn't know that he was necessarily evil. I don't really know the context of all of this, but yeah, okay. And then you fight, what's the guy's name?
Nightmare.
Nightmare? Okay, yeah. Nightmare, who makes a frequent appearance. Actually, all of these bosses make a frequent appearance. These enemies, really. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
I think the Nightmare fight is really cool, actually, because after you defeat... So basically, just to explain a little bit more of the story, which, to reiterate what Kevin said, it literally just tells you the story at the end.
Yeah.
I'm sure the instruction manual mentioned it, because like back then, people would read the manuals and they'd use the manuals to explain shit. So basically, you go throughout all these worlds, defeating the bosses and collecting pieces of the Star Rod, which DDD himself broke into pieces. And you restore the Star Rod and you put it back into the Fountain of Dreams so that people can have dreams again. But little do you know that Nightmare was waiting the whole time for you to do that, kind of like a Ganon and Ocarina of Time sort of scenario.
Right.
And Nightmare swoops in and takes the Star Rod and starts giving everyone nightmares, true to his name. So then you go and you defeat him, and then you realize afterwards, or rather the game tells you, that DDD took the Star Rod and broke it into fragments as a way to hide it from Nightmare to prevent him from doing the evil thing that he very briefly did until you kicked his ass. So,
right.
But it's really cool, though, because you defeat DDD, and then Nightmare comes, and you fly up into space, basically, and it's like a side-scrolling shooter game, which is really cool, because nothing else in this game is like that, so I think it's pretty neat how they changed the formula for that battle. But you're constantly descending the whole time, and if you take too long to beat him, you will, like, the screen will be taken over by the ground, and you'll die.
Whoa.
Like, you'll get crushed into the ceiling, so to speak. So
Whoa.
it's actually pretty, like, I'm not going to say it's difficult, but, like, I'm fairly good at this game, and I'm defeating this boss as quickly as I can, and I still don't have a ton of time left over at the end.
Yeah.
So they make you work for it. It's really cool and cinematic, and then you go fight his final form on the moon, and then when you beat him, like, a chunk of the moon blows up, which is kind of tragic.
It gets crazy.
Yeah, but it's cool though. Like they made the end of the game feel really cool and different from the rest of it, and I think that's impressive.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that about wraps it up for me. I don't know about you.
I am all wrapped up like a little present.
Well, I gave it a cold, hot. See, those two things don't go together. And sticky. And wet and all the gross things.
Shut up.
I'm just kidding. I gave it a 75.
75?
Yeah.
Damn, dude, I gave it a 95.
Damn, 20-point difference.
Was that after? And the 75 was after you increased your score based on my sales pitch?
It was a 72. Then went up to 75.
Yeah, like I said, I weighted it more in favor of the things it did right this time, or for this category, because I thought they were impressive.
Yeah. To be honest, I didn't find it compelling enough to really even. I hate to say this, but I didn't complete the game because I had already beaten the game before, so I just played through most of it. So I was just like, yeah, I know how this goes. So I just didn't feel like, and even in that, I didn't want to play through it entirely again. So I was like, all right, we're good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess that kind of spoke to its content rating in a sense.
Yeah, that's true. I did have a more first-time experience than you did, so it makes sense that our opinions would differ in that regard.
Right.
But the good thing about our show is that when we calculate behind the scenes all the crazy math that goes into our magical, mysterious ratings, everything kind of comes out in the wash.
Yeah.
So actually it might be time to do just that. Do you agree?
I agree. Let's do it.
Beep, boop, beep. I am Petebot. I have finished calculating scores. Process complete. Kevin, we need a human to interpret these results. Do you want to tell us?
Yes.
The summary of your score?
Yes. Back in record time, I think this is the fastest we've ever done number crunching. But I'll just go back and give you the overview. So I gave gameplay a 70, visuals a 90, audio an 86, which makes my aesthetics rating an 88. And my content was a 75, bringing my overall. Are you ready for this? You might not be as upset once you hear. My overall was a 77.7.
Oh my Lanta.
The lucky one. 2 quick ones.
3 quick sevens.
3 quick sevens.
So the summary of Petebot's scores is I gave gameplay an 80, I gave visuals a 95, and audio big fat hundo, which means that my aesthetics was 97.5, and my content was also a 95, which means my individual overall score was a 90.8.
Damn, son.
Very, very different opinions this time, I guess, in some categories.
I think so, but I kind of like that, and it kind of just it brings them together.
Yeah,
and it gives us an overall score, what the true score of what this game actually is. There's no lie. This is the score to an 84.3, which puts it number 17 on our list
out of 24. Yeah,
24 games. So not a little bit on the lower end, but mostly due to me. But
how dare you sabotage this game's beautiful legacy?
I mean, yeah, it was pretty good, and I think it definitely was good for the console that it was created for, but at the same time, I don't think it held up. And we've already discussed this. I don't think it held up over time, as well as some of the other NES games did.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very accurate score, and it's not a bad score. Like, we've rated a lot of good games. 84.3 is still a good game.
Yeah. What are some games that are around this game's score? What kind of company is it holding?
Mega Man X is right above it. Rocket League is right above that one. And below it is Donkey Kong Country.
Oof. Big oof. I blame you for that, Kevin. How dare you?
Oof.
These platformers, man, I'm telling you. I'm the platform boy, and you're just...
You're the platform boy, and I'm the not platform boy, and so we kind of come together to be this average platform boy.
This gray circle
Yeah.
of platforming.
Right. But yeah, no, I think that was a good episode. It's definitely really good to hear some interesting viewpoints on your side and my side, and I think we'll let the audience members decide for themselves. Perhaps one day we can have a fan ranking. I've tried to work on that before, but I don't know. We'll see what we can do. But
yeah,
until then, it's number 17 out of 24.
I think my closing statement for this game will be, it's an impressive NES game in many regards, but it's hard to recommend to a modern gamer. If you want to experience the magic of this game, I would say maybe briefly play it somehow on an emulator or something, and then go and just play the Game Boy Advance remake called Kirby's Nightmare in Dreamland, because that game is the definitive version of this, I would say.
Yeah.
So very, very good remake. I would say it's a pretty faithful remake, having played both games. So I would recommend that one. And also there's plenty of other great Kirby games as well, but I think it's worth it to see where it all started. So I'm going to leave it at that. Or not even, because it's not the first game, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. All right. Well, that does it for us, guys. Quick shout out to our patrons. We've got Katie Davis, my beautiful fiance, as always. Mallory Sutton, the homie. Ryan Everett, Seth Webb, Simon Webb, and my new roomie, Mr. Z-Link.
Oh, I wish I lived with Z-Link.
It's kind of funny. He put his name as Z-Link instead of, like, everybody else has their full name, but he has it as Z-Link. So it's pretty funny.
Chris is trying to keep his full name on the DL.
On the DL. Well, yeah, that's going to do it for us, guys. You know where to find us by now. But if you don't, we're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, however you found us.
Walmart, Sam's Club, Trader Joe's.
And we're also on Twitter, Facebook, pretty much every social media you can find, Instagram. Typically it's the IG Cast, but if you Google the Interstate Gamers or the Interstate Gamers Podcast, you could probably find us. So, yeah, it's kind of hard not to find us.
Kevin, I actually almost forgot, but we did get, I don't know if you checked the email account before we started recording, but I did kind of randomly, and we did get a piece of fan mail.
Did we?
Yeah, it's from an anonymous address, which is kind of weird, but I'll just read it briefly to you. It says, "Dear Kevin, why are you so sexy?
Well,
love, your secret admirer."
Well, you see, Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous, back in 1993, the era of, Kevin, I was born. And from then, I don't know where I'm going with this.
I would say that Kevin being born is kind of like Kirby's Adventure for the NES, and that it really set the stage for all the future successes. That
all
Kevin
the future Kevins.
Yes. Yeah, so yeah, that was a totally real piece of fan mail that we received. I just wanted to make sure that you...
no. Yeah. I appreciate the fan mail, and I definitely agree with you, and I don't know why, but it just is, and I am, and I'm sorry. Or, I don't apologize for that.
Hashtag
Thank you.
Sorry, not sorry.
This has gone on way too long. So, thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next episode where we've got something pretty special in store for you.
Hell yeah. Love you too.
Love you too, guys.